You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, staring at nothing in particular. The day had been long, but not bad. Just work. The kind of day where you get home, kick off your shoes, and try to zone out for a bit. Alice walked in, folder in hand. She looked calm, too calm. I didn't ask her about her day. She didn't offer. Instead, she put the folder down on the table and said, "I want a divorce." It hit me, but I didn't react. It wasn't a blow to the chest or a shot in the gut. It was more like a slow deflation. I set my mug down and looked at her, waiting for her to say more. She did. "I've figured everything out. Assets, property, custody of the dog. I'll keep the car. You'll get the savings account." She slid the manila folder toward me. It looked too neat, too final. I picked it up, scanned the first page, didn't say a word. Alice, like always, seemed to be in control. She got up, grabbed her purse, and started for the door. "You don't want to fight about this?" she asked, almost sounding surprised. "No, I didn't have the energy." She left, not even a glance back. I stared at the door after it closed, then grabbed my mug again. Took another sip of my coffee. It was still hot, still bitter, but it tasted different now. I thought about the last few years, how we'd slowly drifted apart. There wasn't any big argument, no one incident that pushed us over the edge, just slow, steady distance until we were both strangers, living together. I put the folder aside and stood up, cleaned my cup, wiped the counter. Something felt off, like I was moving in slow motion. Was it relief, or was I numb? I didn't know, and it didn't matter. There was no rush to figure it out. The apartment was quiet, emptier somehow. I hadn't expected this moment to feel like this. I don't know why I agreed to go to dinner with Alice and our friends, but I did. I was already feeling off, like I was watching someone else's life instead of living my own. Alice was the center of it all naturally. She had always been that way, but tonight it was different. She was performing. We sat around the table at some upscale spot in the city, the kind of place where everyone looks like they're trying a little too hard. I didn't want to be here, but I wasn't sure where else to be. Alice had already told them. Most of our close friends knew by now, but tonight was the night she'd made it official. She wasn't going to shy away from the spotlight. "Tom and I have decided to part ways," Alice started, smooth as hell. She didn't flinch, didn't look at me. Her voice was steady, like she was announcing a new business venture or a trip she was planning. "It's been a long time coming. We've grown apart." I stayed silent, barely glancing up from my wine. She was playing it up, like she was in control of the whole thing, like she'd made all the right moves. Her words didn't sting. They just felt rehearsed, like she was reading lines from a script she'd written long ago. Lisa, our mutual friend, leaned in, half smiling. "Wait, is Tom okay?" she asked, her voice carrying a little too much curiosity. "I mean, with the whole..." She glanced at Alice, then back at me. "Divorce thing." Alice laughed, quick and sharp, like she'd already rehearsed that too. "Oh, he's fine. Tom's been stuck in his ways for years. He's never been one to show emotion about anything." She smiled at me then, just enough to make it clear she was in control. I didn't react. The conversation shifted, but I could still feel it hanging there, the narrative she was building. I was the problem. I was the one who didn't change, who didn't try. She wasn't wrong. I wasn't the guy who fought for anything. But hearing it laid out like that, like I wasn't even in the room, made me realize how small I had become in this whole thing. The rest of the night blurred by, with Alice answering questions, laughing, playing the role of the wrong partner who had finally found the strength to leave. I was just there, a prop in the background. She'd already framed the story, and there was no room for my version of things. It wasn't even anger that hit me. It was just exhaustion. A weird kind of peace, maybe. I didn't have to fight it. I didn't have to explain anything. We all finished our meals, and the bill came. I didn't offer to pay for Alice, didn't even look at her when she made a half-hearted comment about how things would go with the property and the dog. I was done. She knew it. I knew it. I stepped outside first, not waiting for anyone. The city felt colder than usual, but maybe it was just me. The distance between us had grown so far that I didn't even know what the hell I was supposed to feel. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was just empty. And oddly, for the first time in a long while, that didn't feel bad. I walked home alone, the sound of my footsteps too loud in the quiet streets. There was nothing to prove anymore, nothing to fight for. She had already left, in a way that had nothing to do with me. The next morning, I started going through the closet. It wasn't something I planned to do, it just happened. I had no reason to keep any of it, not anymore. The old boots I'd worn for years, the fishing rod that hadn't seen a lake in who knows how long, the worn-out jacket from a trip we'd taken 5 summers ago. I packed them all into boxes almost mechanically, each item a symbol of a life I was walking away from. I couldn't help but notice how much Alice had changed things over the years. Small things, like the way she'd redecorated the living room, the soft beige couch and the expensive-looking throw pillows. Things I'd never cared about. Things I hadn't even noticed until now. The new rug in the entryway. The little knickknacks she'd collected from places I'd never gone. Things that made the house feel more like hers than ours. The more I moved through the house, the more I realized how much of it had shifted around me. I'd been here, but I hadn't really been here, not like her. I moved to the garage next, packing up the things that had been collecting dust. The old toolbox, the random furniture we'd bought in a frenzy of, let's make this place better. Alice had a vision for the house, a sense of making it comfortable, lived in, but it never felt like my space. Not really. I wasn't a part of that vision. In a corner of the garage, I found a box full of baseball cards. I hadn't thought about them in years. When I opened it, the smell of dust and old cardboard hit me. They were from when I was a kid, before all the noise of adulthood took over, before everything became a transaction, a responsibility, a quiet negotiation to just keep things running. The cards were faded now, but some of the names still jumped out at me. Nolan Ryan, George Brett, the stuff of childhood heroes. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It felt like looking at a version of myself I'd forgotten, someone who had time to dream, to waste, to be careless. Someone who wasn't so wrapped up in making sure everything stayed in place. It felt like a lifetime ago, and maybe it was. Maybe I had buried that guy under everything that came after. The house was emptier now, quieter, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. But what was left to wait for? I had already given up the fight. I glanced over at the bed. The same bed Alice and I had shared for so long. The bed where we used to argue about anything and everything, the smallest things. Who left the dishes in the sink, whose turn it was to take the trash out. Looking at it now, I didn't want to argue anymore. What was the point? The words would fall flat. The fights would be empty. The bed just felt still. I thought about the way things had slowly come undone between us. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't explosive. It was just a gradual erosion, an accumulation of tiny moments that piled up until they buried us. There wasn't a moment where I thought we'd be here, where I'd be packing up my life into cardboard boxes while she moved on to whatever came next. I'd be moving out soon, into the new apartment I found, a place that felt neutral, clean. I wondered if Alice ever really understood me. There were times when I thought she did, when I felt like we were on the same page. But looking back now, it felt like I was always a character in her story, never the lead role. I didn't know if I'd ever really understood her either. Was that the problem all along? I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt like I was shedding something heavy, something that didn't fit anymore. Packing up the last of my things, I glanced around the house one more time. It didn't feel like home, not anymore. And as much as I wanted to make sense of it all, I didn't have the energy. Maybe there wasn't any sense to be made. I stepped out of the house, locking the door behind me. The apartment, small and bare, didn't feel like much yet, but it was mine. It was mine to fill, or leave empty, or do whatever I wanted with. It was a space where I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. Maybe that was enough for now. A week later, I was scrolling through my phone when I saw the photo. It was Alice, sitting at a cafe with some guy I didn't recognize. David, I later found out. She was smiling, laughing, like she'd just heard the funniest joke. The picture had a soft filter on it, making everything look warm, like some kind of damn postcard. She looked happy, really happy, in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. There it was, the flicker of something. Jealousy, maybe, or just irritation. I wasn't sure. It was an odd feeling, though. It didn't hurt the way I expected it to. More like a cold, shallow jab that faded as quickly as it came. The truth was, Alice and I hadn't been happy for a while. I'd known that, but seeing her this free, it stirred something I wasn't prepared for. I didn't dwell on it too long. Instead, I met Paul for a beer that night. I showed him the photo, and he just shrugged, a little more dismissive than I expected. "What's the problem, man? She's moving on." "I know," I said. "But it's weird, right? I didn't expect her to look that—" I stopped myself. "Happy." Paul took a sip of his beer, squinting at the picture. "You really think she wasn't planning this for a while? That she wasn't already checked out? She's been out of the marriage for months now, dude. She just didn't say it until she was ready." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. He was probably right. Alice had been distant for so long, I just hadn't seen it for what it was. She'd been moving on long before the divorce papers were even signed. I didn't feel much after that conversation. No real anger, no need for an explanation. I just couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Alice had already started writing a new chapter without me. A better one. A few days later, I ran into David at a local bar. I wasn't looking for him, wasn't expecting to see him, but there he was, leaning against the bar with a drink in hand. He looked like a guy who belonged in Alice's new life. Fit, smiling, the kind of guy who'd never worn work boots a day in his life. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. Walk up to him? Say something? But I didn't. I just watched him from across the room, studying the way he interacted with the people around him, how comfortable he seemed in that space. It felt insignificant, like nothing had really changed except the people in it. David didn't even notice me, and I wasn't going to make myself noticed. What was the point? I finished my drink and left without a word. Walking out of the bar, I felt nothing. No anger. No need for closure. Just a strange detachment, like I wasn't even a part of this anymore. Alice had already moved on, and I wasn't part of her story anymore. It was hers to write, and I was done trying to hold on to whatever version of it I had imagined. I didn't need to prove anything to her. I didn't need to fight for her. I just didn't care anymore. It was late, close to midnight, when Alice's name popped up on my phone. A text. I wasn't sure why she'd be reaching out, but the message was simple. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a moment. What could she possibly want? The divorce had already been decided. Everything was in motion. We weren't even on bad terms anymore, just distant. There was nothing left to say, was there? I tapped out a response. About what? And set the phone down. I didn't expect an immediate reply. It was late after all, and we hadn't exactly been chatting every night. But I still felt this strange, nagging pull. Something was still hanging out there, unresolved. I checked my phone again when I woke up. No new messages. Hours passed, and still nothing. It was starting to bother me, in that dull, slow way that things settle under your skin when you don't address them right away. What did she want? And why had she reached out in the first place? I sat with the question for a while, letting it roll around in my head. Maybe I should just meet with her. Maybe that was the closure I'd been waiting for. Not that I needed closure. I hadn't been waiting for any dramatic conversation, no final showdown. I just didn't know what else to do with the loose ends. There was a part of me, small but persistent, that wanted some sort of clean finish. Still, I didn't rush to answer her. Maybe she'd get back to me. Maybe she wouldn't. A few more texts from her trickled in by the afternoon. Small things, logistics, about the house, about the dog, about insurance. She was just confirming the details, making sure we had everything in order. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Then the call came. I saw her name on the screen again and almost let it go to voicemail. But I didn't. "Hello?" I said, waiting for her to say something. Anything. Her voice came through, calm, collected. It was like we hadn't just spent years together. "Hey, Tom. Just wanted to go over a few things. Legal stuff, mostly. The paperwork is almost done. We need to finalize the division of the property. There's a form for the dog's transfer, and I think we're almost there." I let the words sink in. She wasn't calling to have a heart-to-heart. There were no tears, no apologies. Just business. The cold, neutral language of contracts and agreements. I could hear the sound of her coffee cup clinking in the background, her life continuing, moving forward. I was just another transaction now. I nodded, though I knew she couldn't see it. "Yeah," I figured. "Anything else?" I didn't feel any rush to get through this call, no impulse to hang up or push back. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad, I was just here, listening. Alice continued with her list, checking off the boxes as if she was talking about some deal she'd been working on for weeks. I didn't interrupt. It didn't feel like a conversation. It felt like a task. She wasn't asking me how I was doing, wasn't checking in on my side of things. She just wanted to make sure everything was wrapped up neatly, done right. When she finished, there was a slight pause, a crack in the facade. "That's everything," she said softly, like maybe she expected something more. Maybe some kind of sign that I cared or that I was hurting. But I didn't have it in me to give her that. I didn't feel it. "All right," I said. "I'll look over the paperwork when it's ready." My tone was flat, but it wasn't intentional. It just was. She didn't respond right away. There was an uncomfortable silence, one that stretched too long before she finally said, "Take care, Tom." I didn't say it back. I didn't feel the need. The words felt like a formality, just another part of the process. Another thing that had to be said. The call ended, and I set the phone down on the table. I couldn't help but wonder, had this always been her plan? To handle everything this way, calm, collected, and detached? I hadn't been surprised by the conversation, but the flatness of it, the absolute lack of emotion, it bothered me more than I thought it would, like everything was too clean, too easy for her. She'd moved on long before I had, and now she was just crossing off boxes. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, I just felt nothing. It wasn't even disappointment, it was just the feeling of everything being done. And the strangest thing was, I was okay with that. It was a couple of weeks after the divorce papers were final when I saw Alice again. I was walking down Main Street, running errands, trying to forget what had just happened the day before. I wasn't expecting it. There she was, standing outside the coffee shop, her back to me. She didn't notice me at first. I would have kept walking, kept my head down. But then I saw him, David, standing next to her. She was laughing, and the way she looked at him, how easy it was, caught me off guard. I hesitated, my feet stopping without me telling them to. They both turned, and for a second, Alice's smile faltered, just briefly. But then it was back, and she stepped toward me. "Tom," she said, almost cheerfully, "I didn't expect to run into you here." "Yeah, me neither," I muttered, unsure what to say, unsure why I was still standing there. "This is David," she said, motioning toward the guy next to her. "David, this is Tom, my ex-husband." She said it with the same tone as if she were introducing someone at a dinner party. No tension, just matter of fact. David stuck his hand out, offering a polite smile. I shook it, but I felt the weight of the moment. The disconnect was immediate. He wasn't a stranger, not to Alice, but he sure as hell felt like one to me. We stood there for a minute, all of us making small talk. The weather was nice. It was a good day for a walk. I found myself nodding along, but not really engaged. I was keenly aware of how natural Alice and David seemed together, how easy their interaction was. There was none of the tension, none of the hesitation that had marked everything between Alice and me for the last few years. I could see how much she had moved on, how much she had left behind. The odd thing was, I didn't feel any anger. I wasn't bitter. I just felt out of place, like I was watching a version of my life that wasn't mine anymore. They were talking, both of them, and I just stood there, silent, like a ghost in a place I used to belong. I watched Alice as she laughed at something David said. She was so at ease, so comfortable. I couldn't help but wonder how long she'd been checked out. How long had she already been with him, emotionally, while I was still here, hanging on to something that didn't exist anymore? Maybe she had been looking for an exit for a lot longer than I'd realized. When we finished with the small talk, the awkwardness was palpable. There was nothing left to say. I could feel the distance between us, like it had always been there, but now it was impossible to ignore. "Well," Alice said, breaking the silence, "it was nice running into you." "Yeah," I replied, looking between them, unsure of what I was supposed to feel, unsure of how to end it. "Take care, Tom," Alice said, her voice almost too calm. There was no bitterness in her words, no anger. It was just final, like she was closing a door I didn't even know was already closed. I watched her walk away with David, the two of them chatting like they'd been together forever. I stood there for a moment, feeling like I didn't even know where I was anymore. My hometown, the place I'd grown up, had suddenly felt like a foreign country. I didn't belong to it anymore. I turned and kept walking, but the weight of it stuck with me. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad. I just felt lost, like the life I thought I knew was slipping away, and there was no place left to put my hands on it to steady it. I spent the next few days settling into the new apartment, doing the kind of small tasks that didn't feel like much, but somehow made the place mine. I painted the walls a soft blue, nothing bold, just a change. The furniture was simple, practical, and modern. A small sofa, a few chairs, and a wooden coffee table. No clutter, no extra pillows or throw blankets. The old stuff, the stuff Alice had picked out, Felt like it belonged to a version of me I wasn't anymore. I'd always been the kind of guy who just went along with things. I never cared much about decor, but now the space felt different. It felt like something I was creating, something just for me. A place where I could do whatever I wanted, a place where I didn't have to explain myself. I started spending more time at the local cafe down the street. It was a small, quiet spot with mismatched tables and old wooden floors. I didn't go for the coffee, though I drank it. I went for the feeling of being out in the world again, of not just sitting at home staring at walls. I pulled out a book I'd bought years ago, but never touched, the kind of book that had always been sitting on a shelf gathering dust. I told myself I'd read it someday, but I'd never had the time. Now, I had time. The first few pages were slow, like I had to remind myself how to focus. But soon enough, the words started to click. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just read without feeling guilty or distracted by everything else. And as I read, something weird happened. I stopped thinking about Alice. The thought of her didn't weigh on me the way it used to. I wasn't tracking her every move anymore. I wasn't wondering if she was thinking about me or if she was happy with David. She was gone, and for the first time, I wasn't measuring my days against hers. I found myself thinking more about the future. I started planning weekends for myself, things I'd put off for years because I'd always been too busy or too wrapped up in whatever was going on between Alice and me. Hiking trips. I hadn't hiked in ages, but I used to love it. I looked into a local sports league for pickup basketball. Photography too, something I had enjoyed in high school but dropped because life got in the way. I reached out to a few old friends from high school. It felt strange at first, almost like I was reconnecting with ghosts of a past life. But when we met up, it was like picking up right where we'd left off. We talked about stupid things, old stories, old jokes, the stuff that had mattered when we were young. It felt good to laugh again, to remember that I wasn't just a divorcee, I was me. And I'd forgotten what that even meant. I was starting to feel like myself again. Not the guy who had been married to Alice, not the guy who had put up with everything just because it was easier than dealing with the mess. I was someone else now, someone who didn't have to make excuses, who didn't have to explain every decision. It was liberating, but it was also weirdly humbling. I realized how much I'd let go of over the years, how much I'd sacrificed without even realizing it. My hobbies, my time, my own damn interests. It was like I'd been living in someone else's shadow, but now I was carving out my own space, my own life, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about how it looked or what anyone thought. The future was wide open, and I didn't have to share it with anyone if I didn't want to. I rented a small cabin for the weekend. It was a simple place tucked away by a lake, far from the noise and distractions of the city. I needed to get away from everything, all the changes, all the noise in my head. The cabin felt like a good way to hit pause, to breathe without anyone or anything demanding my attention. I spent the first evening just sitting outside by the water. The sun was dipping low, casting a soft glow across the lake. It was peaceful here. Nothing but the sound of the water lapping against the shore and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I hadn't realized how badly I needed silence until I was surrounded by it. There was no one around, no one to talk to, no one to check in with. Just me, alone with my thoughts. I thought about my life so far, the highs, the moments that felt like they mattered, like I was really living, and the lows, the failures, the times I felt like I was drowning in things I couldn't control. The things I'd never said, the words left unsaid between Alice and me. Those years of quiet distance before it all fell apart. I wondered if Alice ever thought about this, me sitting alone in a cabin by a lake, quiet and still, content. I wondered if she had ever imagined this version of me, or if she always thought I'd be the same person I was when she left. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of myself I had lost in the years we spent together. Not on purpose, not because I wanted to, but because I'd let it happen. Alice had her life, her things, her plans. I just kind of followed along, going through the motions, thinking it was enough. But here, alone, I felt a shift. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even sad anymore. I was just at peace. There was a quietness inside me now that hadn't been there before. The pain of the past, of losing Alice, of feeling like I was nothing more than a spectator in my own life, was still there, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't a weight I carried. It was just part of the story now. I stood up and started walking along the edge of the lake. the cool air cutting through the warmth of the evening. The path was narrow, winding through the trees, and I found myself taking in everything around me, the sounds of the forest, the smell of pine, the distant call of a bird somewhere in the trees. It felt good to walk, to let my mind wander. As I walked, I thought about the lessons I'd learned, about how easy it is to lose yourself in someone else's life, about how you can get so caught up in making things work that you forget what you need. What you need. The past had been messy. It had been full of things I couldn't fix, things I couldn't change. But as I moved through the woods, I felt that weight start to lift. I wasn't angry with Alice. I wasn't angry with myself. What had happened, but it didn't define me anymore. I didn't need to keep looking back. I didn't need to stay angry or regretful or bitter. There was a whole life ahead of me, and it wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about what was still waiting to be discovered. The further I walked, the clearer my mind became. I didn't need Alice to define my happiness. I didn't need anyone to tell me who I was or where I was supposed to be. I was enough, just like this. By the time I made my way back to the cabin, the sky had darkened, the stars poking through the deep blue above. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle into my bones, and realized that I was okay. Maybe better than okay. I had come here looking for solitude, and what I'd found was peace. I didn't need to fix anything anymore. The lessons had already been learned, and that was enough. A month later, Alice sent another text. "I've been thinking about everything. We need to talk." I stared at it for a few seconds. The words seemed so familiar, like a rerun of a conversation I'd already seen too many times. There was a brief flicker of something, maybe curiosity, maybe annoyance. But it didn't last long. Without hesitation, I deleted the message. The phone buzzed again, her name lighting up the screen, but I didn't bother looking. I just turned it off. I sat back in my chair, feeling a weight that I didn't even realize was there lift off me. That sense of closure I'd been looking for, the one I thought I still needed, had already come. It had come in pieces over the last few weeks, in the new space I was carving out for myself, in the quiet of the cabin, in the old friends I'd reconnected with. I was done with trying to figure out why things had happened the way they did. I let out a deep breath and stood up. I wasn't sure what I'd expected from Alice. Maybe a final apology, maybe some kind of explanation. But now, sitting here in my apartment, I realized I didn't need it. I set the phone down and moved to the kitchen. Dinner was simple. Pasta, some veggies, nothing fancy. The kind of meal I would have skipped before, rushing through life without ever paying attention to the small moments. Now, I took my time, savoring the flavors, letting the quiet fill the space around me. The life I was rebuilding didn't need to be complicated. It didn't need Alice's input or anyone else's approval. I realized that some things, some people, were meant to be left behind, and I was okay with that. I finished my meal feeling content. There was no need for drama or grand gestures. The simple, steady rhythm of life was enough. I wasn't wondering what could have been anymore. What mattered now was what was.